I'm not proud of how calm I looked that night. Inside, I was shaking. Because when you hear someone say your name in a whisper after hours, and then you hear the words pin and one clean pull, your brain doesn't go to drama. It goes to math. How fast could they move? How much could they take? And how quickly could I be blamed for it? I worked in operations at a mid-sized logistics firm in Chicago. Nothing glamorous. The kind of place where people brag about family culture, while the executives rotate every 18 months like the building itself is temporary. My job was to keep the gears turning. Vendor payments, shipment authorizations, internal approvals, access management, stuff nobody notices until it breaks. And the reason that whisper hit so hard was simple. My phone wasn't just a phone. It was my second keycard. Company MFA, personal banking, payroll app, a small business account I'd opened on the side for consulting work, even my password manager, all protected by a 6-digit PIN I'd used for years because I'd convinced myself no one would ever be close enough to matter. That night, I learned how wrong that assumption was. The coworker I overheard was named Trent, late 20s, loud confidence, always smiling like he knew something you didn't. He'd been hired 6 months earlier, and he'd slid into our department like oil, smooth, impossible to grip. Management loved him because he had initiative. People like me didn't love him because initiative, in Trent's language, meant stepping over anyone standing still. I didn't walk into the break area. I didn't announce myself. I backed away, slow, and I stood in the hallway long enough to hear the rest. Yeah, Trent murmured into his phone. He does approvals. He has access to everything. If we hit it right, it won't even look like theft. It'll look like a mistake. There was a pause. Then he chuckled. No, he won't go to HR. Guys like him always try to handle it quietly. That line bothered me more than the money, because he was right about one thing. I wasn't the type to run around yelling, but he was wrong about what I'd do instead. I walked to my desk, sat down, and stared at my monitor like I'd just remembered a meeting. My hands weren't steady, so I forced them to be. First thing, I opened my notes app and wrote down the time, exact minute, because people lie later. Time doesn't. Then I wrote, Trent, break area, my PIN, one clean pull. Second thing, I pulled up our building security portal. We had badge logs, not perfect, but useful. I wasn't supposed to access them casually, but my role technically had privileges because I managed vendor access requests and after-hours entry passes. It was one of those, you can do it, but don't get caught doing it, realities. Trent's badge had been used at 9:41 p.m. He wasn't supposed to be there, and what made my skin tighten was that his badge entry wasn't alone. Another badge had opened the same door less than 2 minutes later, a name I recognized. Because he wasn't just a coworker, it was Devin, our junior IT admin, the kind of guy who acted harmless, hoodie, energy drinks, always too busy to answer questions directly. I sat back in my chair and tried to make it make sense. Trent and Devin, after hours, talking about me, talking about my PIN, talking about making theft look like a mistake. That's when the third thing hit me. If they were planning to move money, they wouldn't start with my personal accounts. They'd start with the place where mistakes could hide inside normal business. They'd start with the company. And in our company, there was one pool of money that could move without immediate screaming. The project reserve, a rolling internal fund we used for emergency vendor payments and shipment recoveries. It was big enough to matter and messy enough that small chunks could disappear for a day or two without anyone noticing, and I was one of the 2 people who could approve transfers from it. I looked at the time again, then I looked at the badge logs, then I opened the transfer portal and typed in the reserve account number, just to check, just to calm myself down. But the moment the page loaded, my stomach dropped. There was a pending request, sitting there like a loaded weapon. 48,750. Vendor reimbursement, priority freight, requested at 9:46 p.m. 5 minutes after Trent badged in. 2 minutes after Devin. My approval wasn't on it yet, but the workflow had been staged, prepped, waiting for someone with my authority to click a single green button. And the requester? Not Trent, not Devin. It was my name, my user ID, my credentials. And that's the moment I understood what they meant by one clean pull. They weren't trying to steal with brute force. They were trying to steal wearing my face. I sat there in the dim office, staring at that request, and for a few seconds, I actually felt something close to panic. Because if that transfer went through and it looked like I did it, it wouldn't be a conversation. It would be termination. It would be police reports. It would be my life reduced to a screenshot. I didn't breathe until I forced myself to move. I clicked into the audit details, and I saw the login location, internal network, no VPN, meaning whoever created that request was physically in the building, my building, right now. I closed the portal without approving anything, and I didn't log out. Not yet, because the worst thing I could do was warn them that I'd noticed. So I did the only thing that made sense. I opened a blank email draft and started writing to myself like I was documenting a crime. Time, amounts, screenshots, badge logs. Then I saved it as a draft, so it wouldn't trigger any outgoing trace, and I stayed quiet, because I needed them to believe I was still the guy Trent had described on the phone, the guy who would handle it quietly. But as I sat there, staring at the dark reflection of my face in the monitor, one thought formed in my head, clear and ugly. If they could stage a transfer as me, then they could stage a lot more than that, and I didn't know it yet. But by the end of this, the $120,000 wasn't going to be the scariest number in the story. By the time I left the building that night, I wasn't scared anymore. I was angry. Not the loud, cinematic kind of angry. The kind that sits in your chest like a stone and makes you stop trusting anything that looks normal. Because I kept replaying Trent's line in my head. Guys like him always try to handle it quietly. He wasn't just planning to steal. He was planning to use my personality as part of the cover. And what made it worse was that I knew exactly why I was the perfect target. At work, I was the person everyone leaned on and nobody protected. The one who fixed vendor escalations, smoothed disputes, did emergency approvals after hours. I didn't say no often. I didn't complain. I didn't make trouble. I was useful. Useful people don't get defended. They get blamed. The next morning, I did what any normal person would do first. I checked my own accounts. Everything looked fine. That almost made it worse, because it meant they hadn't panicked. They hadn't tried and failed. They were patient. They were waiting for the right moment. At 9:06 a.m., I was at my desk with coffee I couldn't taste when Trent strolled in like it was just another day. He stopped at the edge of my cubicle, leaned on the divider like we were friends, and smiled. "You were here late," he said. My throat tightened. I kept my eyes on my monitor. "Forgot something," I answered. He nodded like he'd already known that, like it was a detail he'd filed away. "Same," he said. "Crazy week." Then he walked off, and I realized something simple. He wasn't checking in. He was testing me, trying to see if I'd flinch, trying to see if I'd bite. I didn't, but I started watching everything. At 10:30, Devin from IT swung by my desk. He wasn't scheduled to. He didn't have a ticket in our system. He just showed up with that casual, half-apologetic look people use when they're about to ask for something they don't deserve. "Hey," he said. "Quick thing. We're doing a security cleanup. Need to resync your authenticator." I looked up slowly. "For what?" He gave a little shrug. "MFA. Some users are desynced after the update." That was a lie. Not because MFA updates never happen. Because Devin didn't run those projects. Our security vendor handled that. And if there was an update, it came with an announcement, a schedule, and a ticket trail. This was Devin trying to get access to my phone in the most boring way possible. I forced a neutral expression. "Send me the ticket number." His smile froze for half a second. "I can't," he said. "It's internal." "Then email me from the security distro. I replied. If it's real, they'll have the template. Devin's eyes flicked away just once, a microsecond of calculation. Okay, he said. Later then. He walked off too quickly, and that was the moment my irritation turned into something sharper. Because now it wasn't just after-hours whispers. They were trying to touch my access in broad daylight. I stood up, went to the restroom, and locked myself in a stall like a teenager hiding from a fight. Then I opened my banking app and changed my PIN. I changed it again. I enabled biometric-only approval for transfers. I set new passcodes on my password manager. And then I did something I'd never done before. I created a second layer of documentation. Not emotional notes, not, I feel weird about this, hard evidence. I went back to my desk, and using the admin tools I legitimately had, I pulled an export of reserve account transfer history for the last 60 days. Approvals by user ID IP addresses, tied to approvals timestamp patterns. After hours versus business hours. It took me 20 minutes. It shouldn't have been that easy, but companies love convenience more than security. What I found made my jaw tighten. There were 3 small transfers from the reserve in the last month that I didn't remember approving. Not huge. Not call the police, huge. $9,800, $11,250, $7,400, all labeled as vendor reimbursements, all routed to a vendor name that looked real at a glance, and all approved under my user ID. But here's the thing. I'm obsessive about vendors. I had to be. That's how you survive in operations. So I clicked into the vendor profile and checked the tax ID. It wasn't a vendor tax ID. It was a personal SSN format. My pulse thudded once. They weren't just stealing. They were laundering it through vendor paperwork using personal identifiers. And they had already done it 3 times. That meant 2 things. This wasn't new. I wasn't the first person they'd tried it on. I didn't go to HR. Because HR doesn't protect you from a skilled liar. HR protects the company from you. Instead, I did something more controlled. I set a trap. Not a movie trap, a real office trap. I left the system looking normal. I didn't change any workflows in a way that would alert them. But I added a quiet rule, one I was allowed to add because it fell under risk controls for high-value approvals. Any reserve transfer above $25,000 would require a second manual confirmation through a separate approval channel, a channel they didn't have, and then I waited. Because if Trent and Devin were trying to pull $120,000 total, they weren't going to do it in one swipe. That's how you get caught. They'd do it in chunks. They'd do it when the office was distracted. They'd do it when people were tired. And that week, the entire company was tired because we were preparing for the quarterly leadership meeting, the one where the CFO liked to make examples out of people. Wednesday afternoon, the calendar invite hit everyone's inbox. Q4 performance review plus operational efficiency. Those meetings always meant layoffs, reorgs, or someone getting humiliated in front of executives. And the cruel part? Trent was scheduled to present a process improvement slide. A slide that, if I had to guess, was built on the system I'd designed. I could feel it coming before it arrived. Then, late Wednesday night, my phone buzzed. Not a text, not an email, a push notification from the transfer portal. Reserve transfer. Pending approval. $24,900. Just under my new threshold. I stared at the screen for a long time, because that number wasn't random. That number was a message. They knew where the line was. They were probing it, and in that moment, the unfairness landed fully. They weren't just stealing money. They were turning me into the fall guy in slow motion, testing how much they could take before I broke. I didn't approve it. I didn't reject it. I left it pending. And I opened my notes app again and wrote one sentence that made my hands stop shaking. They think I'm asleep, but I'm watching. I didn't sleep much after that $24,900 request hit my phone. Not because I thought they were going to kick my door in, because I finally understood what kind of people I was dealing with. They weren't impulsive. They weren't sloppy. They were patient, professional in the ugliest way. The kind of thieves who don't rush because they're not chasing money. They're chasing plausibility. Thursday morning, I walked into the office early and pulled up the pending transfer again. Same amount, same label, same vendor reimbursement story. Still waiting on my approval. And the part that made my neck tight was the timestamp. It hadn't been created once. It had been touched multiple times overnight, like someone was opening it, checking it, closing it, waiting for me to blink. I opened the audit trail. My user ID had viewed it at 1:12 a.m. I was asleep at 1:12 a.m. I live alone. No roommates. No one touches my phone. No one has my passcodes anymore. So if my user ID was viewing a transfer while I was in bed, that meant the PIN wasn't the key they needed. The PIN was just a bonus. The real key was my account, and someone else was already holding it. I felt that first crack then, the moment where your brain stops arguing with the evidence and starts accepting the worst version of reality. I didn't even finish my coffee. I went straight into our single sign-on portal and checked recent login activity. Most companies don't expose much to normal users. Ours did. Because we were lean. Because we believed trust was a security model. My account showed a login session that started at 9:44 p.m., the night I overheard them. Device, unknown workstation. Location, internal network. And the session was still listed as active. I just stared at it for a few seconds. Like staring longer would change what it meant. Then I terminated every active session and forced a password reset. I changed everything: password manager, email, portal access, and the internal approval system. And for about 10 minutes, I felt something like relief. A clean reset, a reset button. Then my phone buzzed again. Not a transfer alert, a calendar update, a meeting invite from finance, marked required. Subject line, reserve account reconciliation, urgent. For a second, I honestly considered ignoring it, pretending I didn't see it, because walking into that room felt like walking into a trap with my name already written on it. But I went, because if they were going to bury me, I wanted to see who was holding the shovel. The meeting was in a small glass room next to finance. 2 people were already there. Our controller, Elaine Park, and a senior accountant named Victor, who looked like he hadn't slept either. Elaine didn't waste time. She slid a printed reconciliation report across the table and tapped a line with her pen. "Can you explain this?" she asked. It was the same vendor pattern I'd found. Small transfers, spaced out, labeled cleanly, routed just under the levels that trigger automatic flags. And then there was a new line I hadn't seen. 24,900. Pending. Elaine looked me in the eyes. "This request was created under your credentials." Twice. My mouth went dry. I could feel my pulse in my throat, but I kept my voice controlled. "I didn't create it," I said, "and I didn't approve it." Victor leaned forward. "But the system shows your user." I nodded once, slow. "I know," I said. "That's the problem." Elaine studied me for a long beat, like she was deciding whether I was lying or panicking. So I did the only thing that works in real life. I didn't argue. I showed receipts. I opened my laptop and pulled up the badge logs from the night before. The after-hours entries. Trent's badge at 9:41, Devin's at 9:43. Then I pulled up the SSO login history. The session created at 9:44. Internal network, unknown workstation. I didn't dramatize it. I just put the facts on the table until the room went quiet. Elaine's expression changed first. Not shock. Something sharper. Recognition. Like she'd seen this pattern before and hated herself for not catching it sooner. Victor swallowed. "Who is Devin?" he asked. Elaine answered without looking at him. "IT, junior admin." I watched her connect the dots in real time, and the unfairness that had been sitting in my chest all week finally cracked open. Because here was the truth I'd been avoiding. If finance was seeing it now, it meant this wasn't a one-time attempt. It was an operation, and I was the most convenient mask they could wear. Elaine closed the report and lowered her voice. "Do not talk to HR," she said. "Not yet." That surprised me. She continued, calm but clipped. "If we go to HR without a clean package, they'll freeze access, start asking questions, and whoever's doing this will disappear. We need to treat this like internal fraud." I exhaled slowly. I hadn't realized how badly I needed someone else to say those words. Because the moment she said internal fraud, it stopped being a personal paranoia and became what it actually was, a controlled threat, with a process to handle it. Elaine took her phone out and typed a message I couldn't see. Then she looked back at me. "I believe you," she said, "but I need you to do exactly what I say next." I nodded. "From this point on," she said, "you don't confront anyone. You don't hint. You keep working like normal, and you forward every anomaly to me, immediately." Then she paused, like she hated what she was about to ask. "And you're going to leave the bait in place." My stomach tightened again. "The 204900? She nodded. "We're going to watch who touches it," she said. "We're going to capture the access trail with finance and security together. Clean chain. Clean logs." "No," he said, she said. I felt my hands curl under the table. Because I'd been holding back this whole week, trying to be strategic, trying to be smart. But in that moment, I realized something that hit like a punch. They weren't just trying to take money. They were trying to take my life, my job, my record, my credibility, and use it as a shield. And if they succeeded even once at scale, there wouldn't be a clarification meeting. There would be a police report with my name on it. Elaine stood up. "I'm pulling in compliance and our bank relationship manager," she said, quietly, today. Victor looked uneasy. "Are we sure we should—" Elaine cut him off. "Yes." Then she looked at me again. "And you," she said, "you're going to attend the leadership meeting this afternoon like nothing is wrong." The quarterly meeting, the one Trent was presenting at. I felt my stomach drop because I suddenly understood the timing. They weren't probing under 25K by accident. They were setting the stage for something bigger, something timed to chaos. When the meeting ended, when people were distracted, when approvals got rushed, when my name could be used while everyone was watching someone else. I walked back to my desk and sat down. And for the first time since this started, I felt something hard settle in my chest. Something that wasn't fear or anger, a line. That night, I stopped trying to handle it quietly. Because I wasn't dealing with a coworker problem anymore. I was dealing with a theft plan built around my identity. And the worst part, I could already see how they were going to do it. At 1:58 p.m., as people started heading to the conference room, my phone buzzed again. Reserve transfer pending approval. Mold 24900. Same amount. Same label. But this time, the note section had one new line. Urgent. CFO review today. Needs to clear before 4 hours. And that was just the beginning. The quarterly leadership meeting started at 2:30. Same glass conference room. Same catered sandwiches nobody touched. Same slide deck with words like efficiency and leans used like weapons. Trent sat 3 chairs away from me, relaxed, tapping his pen like he was waiting for applause. I kept my face neutral and my hands still, because the only way this worked was if he believed I was still predictable. The CFO, Marla Henson, opened with a warning about cost discipline, then called Trent up to present a process improvement initiative. He stood, clicked his first slide, and I felt my teeth press together. It was my system, not copied line for line. Worse, rebranded. My work described as recent restructuring, with his name on the corner. He talked about closing gaps and tightening controls, like he hadn't spent a week trying to rob the place through those exact gaps. Then right as he started his second slide, my phone vibrated in my pocket. I didn't look down immediately. I waited, slow, casual. When I did, it was a Teams message from Trent. CFO wants that reimbursement cleared today. It's time sensitive. Can you approve before 4? My jaw tightened. He wasn't even hiding it. He was using the room to pressure me, because the request note said, CFO review today, and he was building the story around it in real time. I didn't reply. 30 seconds later, another vibration. This time it was Devin. Need you to re-auth your account after the meeting. Security cleanup, quick. 2 messages, 2 angles, 1 pushing urgency, 1 pushing access. And the whole time Trent kept presenting, smiling at the executives like he was the guy who fixed operations. I glanced up. Elaine wasn't in the meeting. Finance had pulled her out on purpose, but I knew she was watching the back end. I knew compliance was looped in. I knew security had eyes on the building. All I had to do was not tip my hand. At 3:12, Marla interrupted Trent mid-sentence. Before we move on, she said, looking down the table, I'm seeing an urgent vendor reimbursement sitting pending. Reserve account, 24/9. Why is it still outstanding? The room shifted. A few heads turned toward me because everyone knew I was one of the approvers. This was the trap. Make it look like I was delaying something important. Make it look like I was the bottleneck. Make it look like I was negligent. I kept my voice steady. I saw the request. I said, it needs a second verification because of the new reserve control. Finance is already reconciling it. Marla's eyes narrowed slightly. Since when do we need second verification for routine reimbursements? Since we started seeing irregularities, I said, it's a temporary control. Trent's pen stopped tapping, just for a second. Then he forced a small laugh, like I was being overly cautious. Always the risk guy, he said, friendly tone, eyes on me. I didn't smile back. Marla's phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, expression tightening, then stood. I need 2 minutes, she said, and walked out of the room. The moment the door closed, the air changed. Trent leaned closer, voice low. Dude, don't make this weird. It's just a reimbursement. I looked at him calmly. Then it'll clear after verification. He held my gaze like he wanted to intimidate me. Then he nodded slowly, like he'd decided something. He didn't know he'd just confirmed everything. At 3:19, my phone vibrated again. This time, not Teams. A call. Elaine. I didn't answer in the room. I stepped into the hallway, kept my pace normal, and picked up. Her voice was clipped. They're making a move, she said. Right now. What kind of move? We have a live session attempting to access the reserve workflow from a workstation on the 3rd floor. Not your desk? Not finance. It's using your token. My stomach dropped, but my mind stayed sharp. Devin, I said. Likely, she replied. Security is already walking. I leaned against the wall and stared at the carpet pattern, forcing myself to breathe evenly. Do I go back in? Yes, she said. Do not confront. Do not warn. Just keep them calm. I hung up and walked back into the conference room. Trent was on his phone now, head slightly down, thumb moving fast. He looked up when I entered, just a glance, then looked away like he didn't care. But I saw it in his face. The tightness, the impatience, the belief that time was running out. At 3:27, Marla returned, face set. She sat down and didn't look at Trent. Instead, she looked at me. I just got a call from our bank, she said slowly. They're asking why a vendor reimbursement is tied to a personal identifier. Silence hit the room like a power outage. Trent didn't move, but his eyes widened a fraction. Marla continued. They placed a temporary verification hold. They want documentation. Now! Trent tried to recover first. That's probably just a formatting issue, he said too quickly. Some vendors are sole proprietors. Elaine walked in behind Marla before he could finish. She wasn't supposed to be in that meeting. Not like that. She carried a folder in one hand and her laptop in the other. And she wasn't alone. 2 people came in behind her, one in a dark blazer with a compliance badge and one in a building security jacket. Elaine didn't sit. She looked at Marla and said, It's not a formatting issue. Then she turned her laptop so the CFO and the room could see. Audit logs, badge logs, session history. A timeline that started at 9:41 p.m. and never stopped. Elaine's voice stayed level. We have repeated reserve transfers created under an employee's credentials. she said. "We have a live attempt occurring right now, and we have the initiating access points tied to specific badge entries." Trent swallowed, hard. The compliance officer spoke next, calm, practiced. "Everyone in this room needs to remain seated. Security is securing devices and access. This is now an internal fraud investigation." Nobody moved, not because they were obedient. Because when compliance says those words, everyone suddenly remembers they have a lot to lose. Trent's phone buzzed again on the table. He snatched it too fast, then froze when he realized what he'd done. The security lead stepped toward him. "Sir," he said evenly, "please place the phone down." Trent's throat bobbed. He set it down, slowly, like it might explode. Marla looked between Elaine and Trent, face tightening with every new detail. "What names?" she asked. Elaine didn't answer immediately. She looked at me first, briefly, as if confirming I was ready for what would happen next. Then she opened the folder and slid one printed page onto the table. It was a badge report. 2 names highlighted. Trent Halloway, Devin Ross. The security lead's radio crackled. "Third floor workstation secured," a voice said. "Subject in custody. Device is logged in under admin tools. Attempted log wipe failed." Trent's face lost color. He stood halfway, then stopped when the security lead stepped closer. "Sit down," the lead said, not loud, just final. Trent sat, and for the first time since I'd overheard that whisper, I felt something in my chest release. Not relief, not victory. A hard, clean certainty. They hadn't just been caught. They'd been caught in the act. But the chaos wasn't over yet, because Marla turned to me, eyes sharp, and asked the question that mattered most. "Why does the system show his credentials? Your credentials on all of it?" And I realized the last fight wasn't catching them. It was making sure my name didn't stay attached to what they'd done. I looked at Elaine, then at Marla, and I said, "Because that's what they were buying with the theft." A pause. Then I added, "And I can prove exactly how they did it." Marla's jaw tightened. "Do it," she said. And in that moment, with compliance in the room and security standing behind Trent's chair, I understood something simple. This wasn't going to end with an apology. It was going to end with consequences, and I was finally done being the quiet option. Marla didn't ask twice. "Do it," she said again, and the room stayed so quiet I could hear someone's watch ticking. I didn't stand up dramatically. I didn't point at Trent. I just opened my laptop and spoke like I was explaining a process failure, because that's what this was. "The night this started," I said, "my account was used from an unknown workstation inside the building. Internal network, no VPN. Session started at 9:44 p.m. and stayed active. I turned the screen so everyone could see the login record, device fingerprint, timestamp. Then I pulled up the badge logs. Trent badged in at 9:41, Devin at 9:43. The session starts at 9:44, and the first stage transfer request was created at 9:46. No emotion, just sequence. Marla's face tightened, but she didn't interrupt. She was watching it like she was watching a car crash in slow motion, because she knew it was her job to prevent this, and she hadn't. The compliance officer leaned in. "How did they get your credentials?" I nodded once. 2 parts. I lifted my phone slightly, not for drama, just because it was relevant. First, they tried the easy route, my PIN. I overheard Trent say it out loud after hours. They assumed it would give them everything. Trent's lips parted like he wanted to deny it, then closed again. His eyes kept flicking to the door like he was measuring distance. "But the PIN wasn't the real access," I continued. "The real access was an active SSO session. They didn't need my phone every time. They needed my identity inside the system." I clicked into the audit trail of the prior small transfers, the ones labeled vendor reimbursements. "This," I said, "is where it turns from prank to felony." I highlighted the vendor tax ID field. It's not a vendor tax ID. It matches personal SSN formatting, which means the money wasn't going to a legitimate vendor. It was being routed through a fake vendor profile created to look routine. Victor, the senior accountant, looked pale now, because he understood what it meant. Finance hadn't just missed a theft, they'd missed a pattern. Marla turned her head slowly toward Trent. "Those slides," she said, voice cold, "about tightening controls. You were presenting while you were actively exploiting ours." Trent finally spoke, voice thin. "I didn't steal anything. I didn't touch the money." The compliance officer answered him, calm and lethal. "Attempt is enough. Conspiracy is enough. And we have a live access attempt tied to your badge presence and communications. Save it for counsel." Security collected Trent's phone and set it in an evidence bag. Then Marla asked the question that decided whether I walked out as a cleared employee or the convenient scapegoat. "Why is his user ID on the request?" she said, pointing at me. "Explain the mechanism." I nodded and opened a second window, our internal approval workflow. "Because the system trusts any valid session with my token," I said. "If an admin can get into my session or recreate one, they can stage requests under my ID. Then they pressure me to approve it, or they wait for a chaotic moment to push it through when oversight is weak." I paused, let it land. "And today," I added, "they tried to manufacture urgency with the note, 'CFO review, today,' and direct messages. That wasn't coincidence. That was strategy." Marla's eyes narrowed. "Who added that note?" I looked at the screen. The note edit is logged. I clicked the audit detail. Name, Devin Ross. Role, IT admin. Edit time, 2:47 p.m. Right as the meeting started. The compliance officer exhaled once, slow. "That's the cleanest chain we've seen all day." Marla didn't speak for a full 5 seconds. Then she turned to the security lead. "Where is Devin?" "Secured on the 3rd floor," he replied. "He attempted to wipe logs. Device captured before completion." Marla looked back to Elaine. "Call outside counsel," she said, "and our insurer." Then she looked at me again, and her expression, still tense, shifted into something else. Not warmth, but recognition. "You didn't approve anything," she said. "No," I replied. "I left it pending and documented everything." Elaine slid another page forward, and this time it wasn't a log. It was a short memo with a timeline, attached screenshots, and a summary of controls I'd quietly implemented. Threshold verification, risk flags, session terminations. Compliance skimmed it, then nodded once. "This is what prevents wrongful termination," the compliance officer said. "This is what prevents a false police report. He preserved evidence without contaminating it." That sentence, "without contaminating it," was the moment my shoulders finally dropped, because it meant they weren't going to be able to twist this into "he was involved." Not with this package, not with this timeline. Trent tried one last move, voice rising, desperation leaking through. "This is insane," he said. "You're all just out. He's framing me. He's the one with access." Marla didn't even look at him. She looked at the compliance officer and said, "Escort him out." Security stood behind Trent's chair again. This time there was no negotiation. He didn't fight. He just looked at me as he walked toward the door, like he couldn't understand why the quiet guy didn't stay quiet. When the door closed, the room didn't instantly relax. It never does. People were still processing the fact that fraud can happen next to them while they're eating sandwiches. Marla leaned back and rubbed her forehead once. "Your job is secure," she said to me, blunt, "and I want a full review of every access model tied to approvals, starting today." I nodded. "You'll get it." Elaine didn't smile, but her voice softened slightly. "You did the hard part," she said. "You didn't panic." I thought about that for a second, because the truth was I had panicked. I just didn't let it drive the steering wheel. 2 weeks later, the company sent a short internal message about policy violations and separation of employment. No names, no details, but the real consequences happened quietly. The bank reversed the suspect transfers and flagged the fake vendor profile. Compliance filed a report and preserved device images. Outside counsel handled law enforcement contact, not HR, and every approval workflow in the company was rebuilt to stop borrowed identity fraud. As for me, Marla asked me to present at the next quarterly meeting, not because she suddenly respected operations, because she needed the room to understand the difference between a person who talks about control and a person who actually builds it. And the last thing I'll tell you, the part that made it feel finished, was what happened on a random Tuesday evening when I was leaving the building. I saw the break area where I'd overheard that whisper weeks earlier. Same lights, same vending machines, same silence. But this time, it didn't feel like a place where my life could be stolen. It felt like a place I'd taken back, not with shouting, not with revenge fantasies, with timestamps, evidence, patience, and one quiet decision to stop being the easiest person to blame.